I'm Maria from Sew Local Stitch Lounge. Today I'm going to show you how to make this glasses case. It's designed by Thread Riding Hood. Let's take a look at the supplies we'll be using for the Sunny glasses case. We'll be using a cotton canvas for the exterior and a quilting cotton for the lining. Inside we have a layer of fusible fleece as well as a piece of plastic canvas to give it shape. We're going to be using a magnetic snap closure, and on top of that we'll need thread, pattern and instructions, as well as some basic sewing supplies. First we'll cut out the paper pattern. We'll start with this piece. You can see that this one's a little bit bigger. Hi, David. So the smaller pattern piece is for the fusible fleece. We're going to set that aside. And we need to cut out one each from the exterior and the lining. And keep in mind that this is on a fold. Now we're going to cut out this one. This is the fusible fleece. It says right here, and it says to cut on the fold. So we'll fold that in half. You can see that it's a little bit smaller. We'll be fusing this onto the wrong side of that in a minute. Hold on to your scraps of your fusible fleece because we'll be using a little piece of this later. And now we're going to cut out the plastic canvas. So what I'm going to do is clip on this edge, and then I'm going to use a marker to trace. And I'll be using my paper scissors to cut this out. So before we start sewing, I'm going to transfer the marks. Right here it says mark for Velcro. Well, we're going to be using a snap, but we need to transfer this mark onto the exterior fabric, and we also need to transfer the mark for the edge of flap. We'll do both of those. So we need to fuse the fusible fleece onto the wrong side of the exterior fabric. So I'm going to center this in here, and I'm going to put my iron to the wool silk setting and just keep it here. Once it's stuck, I'm going to flip it over and I can iron it some more. So now we're going to attach the bottom of the snap. I'm going to put this one in because it's a bit thicker. So we'll take this little piece off, and I'm going to use this to mark where I need to cut. Now we need to make a mark where the other half of the snap's going to go. It's going to be on the lining. And I'm going to fold it in half to find the center. And then I'm going to mark 1 inch from this. This is the flap, so 1 inch down from the flap. I'm just going to use the mat to find that. Now I'm going to cut a piece of the scrap fusible fleece, and I'm going to iron this onto the wrong side of the lining just to give it a little bit of stability because the snap's going to go in there. So I ironed this little piece on there. And now we'll make the marks and install the other half of the snap. Now we're going to put these right sides together. You want to have the exterior, the piece with the fusible fleece, right side up because we're going to be using the edge of the fleece as a stitching guide. So right now we're going to be sewing 2 seams. One is going to be along this edge. That's what the instructions are calling the straightest edge, right along here. So we're going to do that, and we're also going to stitch between the 2 flap marks that we made. I made them on the wrong side, on the right side, so I'm just going to transfer them again. So I have 1 mark here. So we'll be sewing from here to here and also from here to here. We're going to be using the fusible fleece as a stitching guide. Now we're going to be sewing from mark to mark using the fleece as a stitching guide. We don't want to sew on the fleece, but just beside it. Now we're going to clip the curve here where the flap is. For an outside curve, you want to take little pie shapes out. That will allow the seam allowance to have space inside once we turn it. I'm also going to do a couple clips here. Since this is an inside curve, I'm just going to do straight cuts like that. And here I do a couple pie shapes because it's an outside curve. Now we need to clip right at the flap marks right here. It says to cut right up to the stitching, but make sure you don't cut the stitching. Now we'll turn it all right side out. And I'm going to use this tool to help that seam get pushed right out. And I'm just going to quickly press this edge. It seems like it's lying really flat though, but I'm going to press it and then we're going to top stitch along this edge. So we're going to be top stitching along this edge right here, really close to the edge. Now, since we have a dark color here and a light color here, and this is going to be the inside of the glasses case, which is going to be really visible. So I want to change my bobbin to match with this. And we'll lengthen the stitch to 3, and that's going to make your top stitch look a little bit nicer, especially because we're on a canvas. And we're aiming for a 1/8 seam allowance. Now we're not going to sew this seam yet, but we're going to do this after. But right now we're just going to put some pins along this edge here. And I'm just kind of rolling that seam allowance towards the lining a little bit. And I'm pinning around the curve about 1/4 inch in. And we want to make sure that the unsewn seam, which is right here, so that the seam allowances are sticking out, so it should look like that. They're very small, but they're sticking out. Now we're going to draw a line between the 2 flap marks. And I'm going to sew across there. Now it's time to insert the plastic canvas. It's just going to slide right in here, and we're going to center it in there. It needs to go between those layers. It's supposed to be inside about 1/4 inch from the fusible fleece on each side. push it over just a little there. And once it's there, then we'll put a couple of pins to hold it in place. Like that. So we're going to be finishing these sides with French seams, and we're going to do it first. We'll sew these seams with the exterior right sides together. So I'm just going to fold this in half. We want this point to match up with that flap mark right here. And I am going to pin this. So now we're going to be sewing with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance from this point down to here. Now we're going to trim the seam allowance down to 1/8. And trimming your seam allowance small is key for a really nice French seam, because with a French seam, you're enclosing your first seam within your second seam, so it needs to be really small. So now we can flip this. Yeah. And this time, I'm going to be sewing from down here, and we'll keep on going all the way up and over the flap, and then finish down here. So we want to adjust the seam so that it's right at the edge, even if that means the front flap is kind of folded funny. It's just going to be like this, and we're going to have the back right side up, and we're doing a generous 1/8 seam now. As we're coming to this side, I'm going to reach in and grab that other pin out, that original pin that was holding the plastic canvas. Now I'm going to fold that edge down like this, and we can keep going.